What's worse than when your team fails to show up on the grand stage of everything with all the expectations in the world? Well, how about blowing a seemingly insurmountable lead and injecting all the pain imaginable into said fan bases? Well, in the case of the MLB, there are tons of instances of it, but fortunately, it's happened to just about every fan base. And in this video, I'm going to relive those moments. These are, in my opinion, every MLB team's biggest choke job. Now, a couple of things before I begin this video. This is strictly my opinion, number one, so you're free to voice your opinion down in the comments below. So this video is more subjective than objective, but these are just my thoughts. And secondly, these aren't necessarily the worst and most heartbreaking losses for every MLB fan base, although some of them probably are. But these are the biggest chokes, and when the teams just fail to show up. So like I said, it's happened to just about every team. So get ready for some PTSD because I'm such a positive person, aren't I? This is every MLB team's biggest choke job. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order here and not really rank anything. Starting with the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks have only been a franchise since 1998. And in 2002, they were a season removed from being the youngest franchise to ever win a World Series. So they really haven't had any huge chokes in just a 26-year history, so this one is kind of it by default. Some could argue 1999 and 2007 were bigger chokes, but Arizona was just in their second season in 99, and in 07, I look at that as just more of bad luck as they ran into a red-hot Rockies team. However, Arizona had expectations in 2002, and in 02, the Snakes looked to defend their title rather well as they went 98-64, won the NL West again, Randy Johnson won his fourth straight Cy Young, and were the second seed in the National League. In the playoffs, they faced the St. Louis Cardinals in the NLDS. The Cardinals were anything but bad in 02 as they went 97-65 and won the NL Central. However, the Snakes were completely shell-shocked in the DS as an error by Tony Womack that set up a Jim Edmonds homer made it 2-0 Cardinals. Arizona eventually tied the game at 2, but then the Cardinals immediately responded with a 3-run top half and the game was out of reach at that point. A 12-2 Cardinals Game 1 rout in Arizona set the tone. Arizona never had another lead until the top of the second in Game 3, only to blow it and have Arizona lose 6-3 to complete the sweep in Busch. Arizona would not make the playoffs again until 2007 and lost Randy Johnson to the Pinstripes after the 2003 season. The 90s Braves were one of, if not the biggest missed opportunities of a dynasty in MLB history. You could pick literally any team in the 90s as the biggest choke for them and you wouldn't be wrong. However, I think 1996 is the biggest collapse for them. Prior to this season, the Braves had lost 2 World Series in 1991 and 92 respectively, but the Braves went from first to worst in 91, so they were lucky to even be there in the first place. As for 92, Toronto was the better team, and again, the Braves benefited from a certain baseball team in Pennsylvania blowing it in the NLCS, so there are no what-ifs there. The year before, the Braves brought home Atlanta's first championship, beating Cleveland in the World Series. So you can look at 96 as being the peak of the 90s Braves run. At 96 and 66 regular season, another NL East title, the first seed in the National League, and breezed by the Dodgers and Cardinals in the playoffs, including outscoring the Cardinals 32-1. After being down 3-1 to them to go to their 4th World Series in the last 5 seasons of the World Series. They faced the New York Yankees, who hadn't made it since 1981 and were emerging as an AL powerhouse, but the Braves were heavy favorites to win this series. It looked to be the case as the Braves pounded the Yankees 12-2 in Game 1 and then shut them out 4-0 in Game 2. The series shifted back to Atlanta with the Braves up 2-0 and looked to complete the sweep. The Yankees took Game 3, but Game 4 is when the Braves truly blew this series. Atlanta had a 6-0 lead after the 5th, but the Yankees fought back. They scored 3 runs in the 6th to cut it to 6-3, thanks to mental errors by the Braves. But in the 8th inning, with Bobby Cox going to his closer, the Braves sank the hearts of their fans. After an infield single, a single, and a botched double play ball, it set up Jim Leyritz with 1 out and runners on the corners. On a 2-2 count, Leyritz smoked a slider over the left field wall to tie the game at 6. The game ended up going to extras where the Yankees got 2 runs and won 8-6. The Yankees won Game 5 in Atlanta to take a 3-2 lead and then took the series in the Bronx in Game 6. The Yankees dynasty was born while the Braves continued to let their fans down. The Braves also lost the '99 World Series to the Yankees, but no one really thought Atlanta would win that series. Atlanta has had their fair share of chokes, looking at you 2016 Falcons, but the '96 Braves have to be no lower than second in my opinion. Unlike the '90s Braves, the Orioles from 1966 to 1983 won multiple World Series titles, but it was debatable if you could classify them as a dynasty. The '70s is when they truly peaked, as they had 3 100-plus win seasons, and in 1979 they did it again. 102-57 and loads of firepower on offense with the likes of Ken Singleton, Eddie Murray, Rich Dauer, Kiko Garcia, and Doug DeSantis. However, pitching was still their biggest strength as they had the lowest team ERA in the AL, led by Cy Young winner Mike Flanagan, Dennis Martinez, Scott McGregor, Steve Stone, and Jim Palmer. With all these elements in play, the O's took care of the California Angels in 4 games in the ALCS and went to their first World Series since 1971 against the same opponent that bested them in said series, the Pittsburgh Pirates. The We Are Family Buccos went 98-64 that season, but many leaned towards the Orioles' dominant pitching in the series, and while the pitching was decent, there were warning signs the Pirates might break through on offense. But the O's had the Bucs on the ropes after 4 games, leading the series 3-1. But the Bucs routed the Orioles 7-1 at Three Rivers Stadium and then shut them out in Game 6 in Baltimore to set up a Game 7. In Game 7, the Orioles had only 1 run, which came off of a Rich Dauer homer in the bottom of the 3rd. This was just their 2nd run in the last 3 games, as even their biggest offensive threat in Murray went a staggering 0-for-21 in Games 3 through 7. This was following their 6-run outburst in Game 4, and in this game, after all-time Bucs legend Willie Stargell crushed a homer in the top of the 6th, the Bucs took the World Series, and the choke for arguably the most complete O's team of the 70s was complete. The Orioles would win the 1983 World Series, however, but this collapse was a big hit on their resume as becoming a dynasty goes. One of the most infamous chokes in MLB history occurred in the Fall Classic of 1986 between the Boston Red Sox and the New York Mets. Going into this series, the Sox hadn't won a World Series since 1918, and people thought the drought would continue in this series as the 108-54 Mets were favored to win it. The Sox were a strong team that season as well at 95-66, but there was no indication that they would bring home the title for the first time in 68 years. However, they looked to put doubts to rest as the Sox won the first 2 games in Shea Stadium, 1-0 and 9-3 respectively, as the series shifted back to Boston. The Mets took 2 of the next 3 in Fenway to set up a memorable Game 6 at Shea, although for all the wrong reasons if you're a Red Sox fan. So let's just fast forward to it. It's the bottom of the 10th inning, and the Red Sox are up 5-3. Prior, the Sox had blown an 8th inning lead, but this one hurt even more. The Red Sox were once again in command and had New York down to their final out. A Gary Carter single, Ray Knight singled to score Carter, and it set up Mookie Wilson. Wilson battled Boston reliever Bob Stanley valiantly, and on pitch number 10, Wilson hit a weak grounder to first. Boston first baseman Bill Buckner, who had been playing close to the foul line to have a better chance at getting Wilson out, but instead he committed one of the most fatal errors ever and one of the most memorable sound bites ever.
Little roller up along first, behind the bag, it gets through Buckner, here comes Knight and the Mets win it!
The Mets won 6-5 and then took Game 7 8-5 at Shea for their 2nd and most recent World Series title to this date. Even though Boston wasn't seen as the favorite to win, it still remains a crushing choke, and Boston's drought lived on for another 18 years. From one infamous moment in baseball history and a lengthy title drought to another. The 03 Cubs and 03 Marlins came out of nowhere to both punch their tickets to the playoffs and made it all the way to the NLCS. The Marlins took Game 1 in Chicago, but then the Cubs pulled off 3 straight wins to go ahead in the series 3-1. Enter Game 6 in Wrigley Field. With the Cubs ahead 3-0 in the top of the 8th, it looked as if the Cubs were going to their first World Series since 1945 and had a chance to win their first championship in 95 years. But, as you all know, that's not what happened. With Luis Castillo at bat, he made Mark Prior work hard, and on pitch number 8, he hit a foul ball to the left field wall. Moises Alou headed to the wall to try and catch it for out number 2 of the inning, and as Alou was reaching to make the catch, Cubs fan Steve Bartman also reached to catch the foul ball, and the ball bounced off of Alou's hands and into the stands. Alou was irate at the play as he was begging for a fan interference, but umpire Mike Everett deemed it up for grabs. And here's why Cubs fans are just so irrational and pathologically dumb. Bartman is not the reason that you choke. Castillo walked on a wild pitch the next pitch, but I don't think it's Bartman's job to field this inning-ending double play. I also don't think it's Bartman's job to do this either.
Hammered down the left field line, and the game will be tied up. Scoring is Castillo, scoring is Rodriguez. It's a 3-3 game as the frustration ends for Derek Lee.
Or this.
That ball hammered into left center field. On the run, Alou. On the run is Lofton, and it's off the ivy. 3 runs are going to score on a double by Mordecai.
I think you get the point. The Marlins exploded for 8 runs in the 8th inning to tie the series, and then just for shits and giggles, the Cubs blew a 5-3 lead in Game 7 at home and lost 9-6 to allow the Marlins to advance to the World Series. Oh, but that's Bartman's fault, right? The series was there for you to grab it, and you just blew it. The White Sox are hardly ever in the playoffs, and when they are, they're almost never favored to do anything, so it was hard to pick a biggest choke for them. So I decided to go with the 1993 ALCS because that looked like the best chance for the Southsiders to end their long title drought as well. The White Sox went 94-68 in 1993 and faced a 95-67 defending champion Toronto Blue Jays in the ALCS. The White Sox had home field advantage though, but that didn't seem to matter as the Jays took the first 2 games in Chicago, setting up the next 3 in the Sky Dome. The White Sox rebounded to take the first 2 in Toronto to even the series that set a rematch of Game 1 between Jack McDowell and Juan Guzman. After a double by Ricky Henderson, McDowell had an ugly throwing error when he tried to catch Henderson stealing third that allowed him to score. The Blue Jays built up a 4-0 lead and basically never looked back. They won the game 5-3 and then ended the White Sox season in Game 6 en route to winning their 2nd straight World Series. And to this day, the White Sox are the most forgettable franchise in baseball, possibly all of sports, even if they won the World Series in 2005. The Reds haven't won a playoff series since the 1995 ALDS and are very lucky that the Pittsburgh Pirates have been an absolute dumpster fire for the last 30-plus years, or else they could be the laughingstock of baseball. However, the Reds built up a solid core in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and in 2012, the Reds put it all together. They went 97-65, won the NL Central for the 2nd time in the last 3 seasons, and were the 2nd seed in the National League. In the NLDS, they faced the NL West champion San Francisco Giants, who you couldn't sleep on, but they were still a threat to go far with their elite pitching. Regardless, the Reds won the first 2 in San Francisco 5-2 and 9-0 respectively. The final 3 games were in Cincinnati, and all the Reds needed to do was win just 1 game to finally get the monkey off their back and win a playoff series. You can really pinpoint any game between 3-5 to see where the Reds choked in this series, but I feel like they truly blew it in Game 3. Homer Bailey, who had no hit the Pirates 2 starts before, had no hit the Giants through 5 2/3 innings with the game tied at 1. It was broken up by a Marco Scutaro single in the 6th, but Bailey remained in the game until the end of the 7th and was brilliant with 10 strikeouts. Neither team would score again until the game went to extras when Jonathan Broxton took the mound. He gave up back-to-back singles to Buster Posey and Hunter Pence to start the inning, but calmed down to strike out the next 2 batters. Then a pass ball allowed both runners to advance, and Scott Rowland had a costly error at third base, on a routine grounder to allow Posey to score. The Reds failed to score in the bottom half, and the series was 2-1 Reds, but like I said earlier, this is where the Reds choked the series. The Giants blew out the Reds 8-3 in Game 4, and a 6-run top of the 5th in Game 5 and a 6-4 Giants win ended a magical season for the Reds. The Giants would rally from a 3-1 deficit against the Cardinals in the NLCS, and then swept the Tigers in the World Series for their second championship since 2010. The Reds still haven't recovered from this series, as they have made the playoffs a few times since then, but they were handled relatively easily in all their matchups. This has to go down as one of, if not the biggest missed opportunities in Reds history. There have been so many playoff letdowns and failures throughout Cleveland's history, but the two that stand out the most to me personally are the 2016 and 1997 World Series. So this one was difficult to pick. However, my deciding factor is that while Cleveland blew the 3-1 lead in 2016, the Cubs were simply the better team, as they outplayed Cleveland in every way for 3 straight games. Cleveland gave an honorable fight but came up short. So I see 2016 as less of a choke and more of a Cubs comeback. But 1997, more inexcusable, more self-inflicted, and more crushing for Cleveland fans. Unlike 2016, the upstart Florida Marlins, who were just in their 5th season as a franchise, were heavy underdogs to Cleveland, who were the Indians at the time, so that's another element to my decision. After alternating the first 6 games of the series, Florida winning games 1, 3, and 5, and Cleveland taking games 2, 4, and 6, it set up Game 7 in Miami. Cleveland had a 2-1 lead going into the bottom of the 9th, but they had blown opportunities to put more runs on the board, including leaving the bases loaded in the top of the 9th. Nevertheless, Jose Mesa came out to finish off the game, but gave up the game-tying run on a sac fly by Craig Counsell to score Moises Alou, and the game headed to extras. Fast forward to the 11th inning, where Cleveland's defense and Charlie Nagy fell apart. A leadoff single by Bobby Bonilla, a bunt single by Greg Zahn, and a throwing error loaded the bases up. Cleveland got 2 outs before facing Edgar Renteria, and on an 0-1 count, he hit a liner up the middle that hit off Nagy's glove and went into center field to score Counsell, and the Marlins walked off the Tribe. The Marlins became the youngest franchise in MLB history to win the World Series at the time, until the Diamondbacks won up them 4 years later, and Cleveland's championship drought continued. The Rockies have been a poorly ran franchise since being founded in 1993 and have seen very little playoff success. They've never won the NL West, and literally every time they were in the playoffs, they were not favored to go far. Instead, I'm going with their downward spiral of the 2010 season. 3 years prior, the Rockies caught fire at the end of the 2007 season, winning 14 of their final 15 games, and then went 7-0 in the NL playoffs to make it 21 of 22, but were swept by the Red Sox in the World Series. I see that as the clock striking midnight on a Cinderella team, as they ran into a far better team. But 2010, the Rockies probably could have made some more noise. On September 18th, the Rockies were 82-66 and were in second place for the NL wildcard. All they needed to do was be okay at the very least, and they could have gotten in. Well, a soul-crushing walk-off loss to the Dodgers set the tone on September 19th, followed by getting swept in Arizona and dropping 2 of 3 to the Giants. At 83-71 on September 25th, the Rockies still had a good chance to turn things around, but instead they lost out to close out the season and finished 83-79. It featured mostly close losses, to which stings even more for Rockies fans. They ended up from going second place in the NL wildcard, losing 13 of their final 14 games, and to finishing 8 games behind the wildcard winning Braves and third in the NL West. Now Rockies fans have devolved into total trash, and I don't foresee them getting better at any time soon. After being a doormat for over a decade, something special happened with the Detroit Tigers in 2006. With smart drafting, the performances of veterans such as Kenny Rogers and Todd Jones, emerging stars in Curtis Granderson, Brandon Inge, Craig Monroe, and Marcus Thames, and a significant contribution from all-stars Pudge Rodriguez, Carlos Guillen, and Maglio Ordonez, and Justin Verlander kickstarting his Hall of Fame career, the Tigers were seen as popular World Series favorites despite not winning the AL Central. After disposing of the Oakland A's and the New York Yankees in the playoffs, their opponent were the St. Louis Cardinals, who won the NL Central by complete default with an 83-78 record. It was the second worst record a team had making it to the World Series in MLB history. Surely the Tigers would cruise past the Cardinals and win their first World Series in 22 years, right? Wrong. In typical Cardinals luck fashion, they stymied the Tigers in 5 games. Despite St. Louis hitting a collective 199, the Cardinals got 22 runs over 5 games, and the pitching suffocated the prolific Detroit offense. Ordonez, who hit 298 in the regular season and was money in that year's playoffs and .310 lifetime, was especially bad as he went just 2 for 19 in the World Series. They earned the split in the first 2 games in Detroit, but then when the series shifted to St. Louis for games 3 to 5, the Tigers were completely dominated as they scored just 6 total runs, including getting blanked in Game 3 behind a superb outing by Chris Carpenter. Game 5 in particular, where Verlander got shelled, an awful throwing error by Inge, and getting owned by career journeyman David Eckstein, this World Series will live in infamy. You have a case for the 2012 World Series and 2013 ALCS as well, but the Giants and Red Sox, respectively, were slightly better than Detroit at the time. 2006 is way more inexcusable. You'll be shocked to know that this was the first and only time a team with 83 or fewer wins won the World Series. Throw out any playoff loss before 2017 because Houston was never favored to do anything. 2018, I felt like the Astros were robbed against the Red Sox. I hardly count 2020 for any team. 2021, they ran into a better team in the World Series. 2023 and this past season, the Astros were lucky to even be in the playoffs, to be honest. But 2019, that's a flat-out choke. At 107-55, Justin Verlander winning a Cy Young, Yordan Alvarez winning Rookie of the Year, Alex Bregman and George Springer winning Silver Sluggers, a Gold Glove for Zach Greinke, and Jose Altuve winning ALCS MVP, the Astros were dominant again and were heavily favored to defeat the upstart Washington Nationals in the World Series. The Nats went 93-69, and while that suggests they were a great team all season, they weren't. In May, they were 19-31, and missing the playoffs seemed inevitable. They went on a great run and took out the Dodgers and Cardinals in the playoffs, but everyone thought the magical run would end in the World Series. It didn't. This was the first World Series in North American sports best-of-7 game series ever to have the road team win all the games. Washington won the first 2 in Houston, and then the Astros took the next 3 in D.C., holding the Nationals to 3 total runs in 3 wins. But the final 2 were in Houston, and the Astros' dominant pitching and offense were completely shut down. 4 total runs on 15 hits, and the pitching had untimely meltdowns. Astros fans have a legit gripe about the interference call in Game 6 as well, but that didn't decide the whole game, as the Nationals got 4 runs in the 7th through 9th innings to win 7-2. But in Game 7, it looked like Houston would buck the trend as they had a 2-0 lead after the 5th inning. Greinke gave up a solo homer to Anthony Rendon to make it 2-1, and then walked Juan Soto and was yanked for Will Harris. Then Harris shit his pants. Harris gave up a 2-run homer to career journeyman Howie Kendrick off the right field pole to give the Nats a 3-2 lead, and they would not relinquish it. The Nats won 6-2 and captured their first and only World Series title in franchise history. Then the Astros were questioned about their integrity with sign-stealing scandals, just as a cherry on top the diarrhea sundae for this joke. I originally had the 1976 ALCS on here for the Royals, but after thinking about it, I'm going to cut them some slack because it was their first playoff appearance in franchise history, and they were facing a loaded, dominant Yankees team. In 1980, however, the Royals were still a strong team in the AL at 97-65. George Brett won MVP, the determination of Amos Otis, Hal McRae, Frank White, and Willie Wilson guided Kansas City to a superb offense. The Royals' pitching was excellent, with having 6 starters winning 10 or more games, with 20-game winner Dennis Leonard and Larry Gura. Closer Dan Quisenberry also had 33 saves on the season, tying Rich Gossage in the American League. The Royals won 90 or more games every year since 1976 up to this point, and after dropping 2 more ALCSs to the Yankees, they finally vanquished them in the 1980 ALCS in a clean sweep. Kansas City wasn't an overwhelming favorite by any means, but they were expected to win the World Series over the Philadelphia Phillies, who were the only NL team to not win a World Series at that time. You could never sleep on them with NL MVP Mike Schmidt, but this was a team mixed with veterans and youngsters, and people lean more towards Kansas City to win this series. It was the series of the hard luck franchises, and hard luck absolutely stayed with the Royals. Philly won the first 2 in Philadelphia, but the Royals rebounded to even the series at 2 apiece as the series shifted back to Kansas City. But if you believe the Royals were truly a bad luck franchise, Game 5 is a very captivating argument. Up 3-2 after 6 innings, Kansas City carried that lead into the top of the 9th. Schmidt led off the 9th inning with an infield single off of drawn-in third baseman Brett's glove. Pinch hitter Del Unser drove him from first with a double that bounced over Aiken's glove and into the right field corner. After a bunt down the first base line by Moreland that moved Unser to third, Gary Maddox grounded to third for the second out. And on an 0-2 count, Trillo drove in the go-ahead run with a line shot that ricocheted off Quisenberry for an infield hit and was almost thrown out by Brett. Boa grounded to shortstop on a high hopper to end the inning. And then in the bottom of the 9th, White led off with a walk, Brett was caught looking, Aikens walked on 4 pitches and was lifted for a pinch runner. McRae hit a fly ball well down the line that was just foul, then grounded to short for a fielder's choice. Otis walked on 4 pitches to load the bases, but then McGraw silenced the crowd by striking out with an inside fastball on a 1-2 count to end the game. The Phillies won Game 6 back in Philly for their first World Series title in franchise history. The Royals' magical season came to a disappointing end, and the bad luck struck them in the worst way possible. But hey, at least the Royals would win the World Series 5 years later. The late 80s and early 90s were some fine years for the A's. From 1988 to 1990, they made the World Series every year and won it all in 1989, and in 1990, they had every reason to believe they'd repeat as champs. They went 103-59 in the regular season and led the league in wins for the 3rd straight season, led by Rickey Henderson, who had 65 stolen bases, 28 homers, .325 batting average, and 1 MVP. Their elite pitching, led by Bob Welch, sluggers/roid abusers Jose Canseco and Mark McGwire, combined for 76 homers and 209 runs. Additions in Willie Randolph, Willie McGee, and Harold Baines, contributors from veterans in Carney Lansford, Terry Steinbeck, Dave Henderson, and Mike Gallego, and up-and-coming youngsters in Walt Weiss and Mike Broddick. It was hard not to say the A's would dominate again and had the deepest roster in the league. True to form, they swept the Boston Red Sox in the ALCS and met a spunky, fun, and determined Cincinnati Reds team who had a late-season surge to capture the NL West. Going in, many expected the Reds to give a fight in each game, but eventually the A's would overwhelm them with their team. Well, they got half of that right. Simply put, the Reds dominated the A's as they swept them. This game is most remembered for Billy Hatcher's 7 straight hits, and more specifically Game 2 in this series. After the Reds shut them out 7-0 in Game 1, this was seen as Oakland's best chance to win a game. Down 2-1 in the 3rd, the A's got 3 runs off a sac fly by Ron Hainsey, a single by Mike Gallego to score Henderson, and a Canseco rocket to right. It seemed like the A's were finally playing up to par and the series would shift back to Oakland tied 1-1. But then Oakland fell apart. Scott Suter shut them down, and Cincinnati's bullpen shut them down in general, and the Reds tied the game in the 8th when Tom Browning's pregnant wife went into labor during the game. The game went to extras, and in the bottom of the 10th, legend Dennis Eckersley took the mound. Back-to-back singles by Billy Bates and Chris Sabo set the stage for Joe Oliver. He hit a bouncer over the third base line that went into left to complete the walk-off to drive in Bates, and Browning's son was born right as the game ended. You know what else was born? One of the biggest upsets in World Series history, as the Nasty Natty Boys completed the sweep in Oakland in Games 3 and 4. The A's have only won 2 playoff series since this crushing defeat and are now on their way to betting the house in Vegas. Similar to the White Sox, the Angels have never really been expected to go on a deep playoff run either, but 2014 saw the only good year the Angels had with Mike Trout. Paired with another all-time legend in Albert Pujols, Trout winning MVP, and a strong rotation, the Angels pulled one of the best seasons in franchise history out of their ass at 98-64. They finished with the best record in all of baseball, and this was seen as Trout's best chance at a ring. So when the Angels faced the wildcard Royals in the ALDS that season, the Angels were favored to best them as the Royals won a hard-fought wildcard game against the Oakland A's. It didn't go well. The Angels were swept in 3 games as Mike Moustakas won the first game in extras 3-2 on an 11th inning homer. LA's 2 errors, a 2-run homer again in extras by Eric Hosmer, and a Salvador Perez RBI earned the Royals a 4-1 win in Game 2, and when the series shifted back to Kansas City, the Royals wasted no time at all. Kansas City exploded for 5 unanswered runs after trailing 1-0 after the top of the first, and that was that. The Royals won 8-3, and the magical season for the Angels was wasted. Kansas City went on to the World Series where they dropped a close 7-game series to the Giants, but since this playoff meltdown, the Angels haven't even gotten anywhere close to being competitive. They went 85-77 in 2015 and haven't had a winning season since, and haven't even made the playoffs since 2014. Sell the team, Artie. Okay, Dodger fans, your grace period is over. Before you won your 2nd ring this decade, let's also not forget that before that, there have been some incredible playoff meltdowns you've had with the best team in baseball for years. However, if you want to pinpoint the season where LA became known as a regular season team and that 2020 was officially labeled a fluke, 2022 was the answer. With their already stacked roster, calling up prospects, re-signing Clayton Kershaw and Jimmy Nelson, and acquiring Freddie Freeman in free agency, the Dodgers won a ridiculous 111 games in 2022. This was the most any MLB team had since 2001 when the Mariners did it, more on them later, and in the playoffs their elite pitching and stacked offense were heavily favored to dominate the San Diego Padres, whom the Dodgers finished a commanding 22 games ahead of them in the NL West. LA took the first game 5-3 and then followed that up with completely shitting the bed the next 3 games. San Diego won Game 2 5-3, and the series shifted back to San Diego, where in Game 3, Tony Gonsolin started Game 3 but only lasted 1 1/3 before being replaced by Andrew Heaney. He allowed 4 hits and 1 walk, but only 1 run scored. Trent Grisham, who hit a solo homer off Heaney to put the Padres up by 2, with the Dodgers getting a run on a Mookie Betts sac fly in the 5th. Both bullpens pitched scoreless innings the rest of the game, with the Dodgers going 0 for 9 with men in scoring position to lose the game 2-1. But Game 4 is literally the one where LA lost the series. A 2-run double by Freeman and a sac fly by Will Smith gave the Dodgers a 3-0 lead, and the bullpen fell apart in the bottom half that 7th inning. The Padres got 5 runs to take a 5-3 lead, and that would be the final. With the upset, the Padres became the first team to defeat an opponent who was more than 22 wins better than them since the 1906 World Series, when the 93-win Chicago White Sox defeated the 116 Chicago Cubs. The Padres advanced to the NLCS for the first time since 1998, and the Dodgers were left speechless on this choke. At least LA avenged them 2 years later en route to a title, but this series loss is plain inexcusable. Oh wow, Miami, aren't you so cool for not having any real playoff chokes? Well, guess what? You've only been a franchise since 1993, so you haven't had much success either aside from a stumbling ass backwards in the 2 World Series. However, remember in my Cubs segment, I said the Cubs blew a 3-1 lead in the 2003 NLCS? Well, the Marlins won the series against the Cubs in 7 games, but if they didn't choke in Game 3, they could have won the series sooner. After 7 innings, Florida had a 3-2 lead, only for their bullpen to give up the lead back. Florida tied the game and went to extras, where in the top of the 11th, Kenny Lofton singled with 1 out. Then the sparingly used Doug Glanville turned out to be the hero when he smoked a triple to the left center field gap to drive in Lofton with the go-ahead run. Mike Remlinger retired the Marlins in the bottom half of the 11th to secure the 5-4 victory. Down 2-1, the defeat was a blow to the Marlins, who squandered several chances with runners in scoring position. Like I said, though, the Marlins won this series in 7 games. They went on to win the World Series in 6 over the Yankees, and then the Marlins followed up on this success by not even making the playoffs for another 17 years, having a worse winning percentage than the Pirates during that time span, while never winning a division title, and being better known for fire sales and empty seats than fielding a winning product. The 2024 season was the first time in Brewers history that the team that beat them in the playoffs didn't win or make the World Series. Seriously, that's quite a phenomenon. In just their second playoff appearance in franchise history, the Brewers were in the AL at the time and had recovered well from an ALC loss to the Yankees a year prior. So when the Brewers went 95-67 and Harvey's Wallbangers clubbed 216 homers that season and beat the Angels in 5 games in the ALCS, they met future division rival foe the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series. I'm sure Cardinals fans were just as miserable back then than they are as today, as 1982 was the first time in a breathtaking 14 years that they made the World Series. While the Brewers were known for their offensive outbursts and homers, the Cardinals relied on defense, pitching, base running, manufacturing runs, and of course, dumb luck. The two valued strong bullpens, however, and that seemed to be the middle ground of this World Series. Milwaukee blew out St. Louis 10-0 in Game 1, but then the Cardinals won the next 2 games. Then, thanks to a 6-run bottom of the 7th in Game 4 and strong outing by the Brewers pitching in Game 5, Milwaukee had a 3-2 series lead going into the 6th inning in St. Louis. Of course, this is the Cardinals we're talking about, so of course some BS is going to happen to keep them alive. Sure enough, that was the case. Milwaukee picked the worst game possible to have 4 errors and lose a game by 12 runs as Game 7 was forced. The Brewers had a 3-1 lead in Game 7, and the Brewers panicked and went to the bullpen after getting 2 men on. St. Louis took advantage of the Brewers being, well, the Brewers, and got 3 runs out of it. The Cardinals won 6-3, won the series, and Milwaukee still hasn't made it back to the World Series since. 2011 was their best chance to get back there, but once again choked to the Cardinals in the NLDS and saw them win the World Series that season as well. But the Cardinals aren't lucky, right? For a franchise that's been around since 1901, it was actually really hard for me to find a biggest choke for the Twins, as in their playoff losses, mostly to the Yankees, they didn't choke, they were just straight up dominated. So I went with the 2019 ALDS kind of by default, since that season, Minnesota won 101 games and ran away with the AL Central. However, the Twins had to be satisfied with the 3rd seed in the AL, as a loaded AL saw the Astros and Yankees win 107 and 103 games respectively. The Twins crushed 307 homers that season, which would be a record for most homers in a season until the Braves broke it 4 years later. In the ALDS, they met their boogeyman Yankees again, but with New York's inconsistent pitching, this felt like the best chance for the Twins at finally conquering their demons. Needless to say, it was only reinforced. The Yankees swept them. All 3 wins were won fairly easily, and the high-powered offense went to sleep the whole series. These 3 L's extended Minnesota's playoff losing streak to 16 games. As of this video, the Twins' playoff record against the Yankees is 2-16. How is it possible to suck for that long against a single opponent? I almost went with the 2006 NLCS for this one for the Mets, but I give them a pass for that series since they were missing Pedro Martinez and Orlando Hernandez with season-ending injuries. Boy, I just can't think of a luckier team that had the privilege of facing a handicapped Mets team in the NLCS. Oh, how'd you know it was the Cardinals? Anyway, the reason 88 lands on here is because the Mets of the 80s had a chance to be a mini dynasty. They were 2 years removed from their stunning World Series win over the Red Sox, and they were pretty healthy going into the series against the Dodgers. The Dodgers were absolutely no slouches themselves as they won the NL West for the fourth and final time of the 80s. The Mets, however, were a much better team at 160 and dominated the NL East with the likes of Keith Hernandez, Wally Backman, Kevin McReynolds, and Darryl Strawberry. This series proved to be a seesaw affair as the series was 2-1 Mets after 3 games, but to me, Game 4 was the backbreaker for the Mets. New York fell behind 2-0 after the first but got a 3-run fourth to take a 3-2 lead and added a run in the 6th. Then in the top of the 9th, Dwight Gooden, who had cruised through the game uncharacteristically, fell apart. Since the first inning, Gooden had allowed 1 hit and only 4 base runners. After allowing a walk, he gave up a 2-run homer to catcher Mike Scioscia to tie the game for LA. The game went to extras when Kirk Gibson, who was 1 for 16 in this series, hit the go-ahead homer which proved to be the game winner for LA. With 2 runners on base and 1 out in the bottom half of the 12th, the lefty Jesse Canseco came to pitch into Hernandez and Strawberry, both left-handed hitters. Canseco worked to a 1-2 count on Hernandez, then threw 3 straight balls to walk the bases loaded. After that ball on his first pitch to Strawberry, Tommy Lasorda went to the mound to deliver a message which started with, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Canseco eventually got Strawberry to pop out in the infield. With right-handed hitter McReynolds coming up, Lasorda summoned Orel Hershiser, even though he had pitched 7 innings the previous day. With Jay Howell having been suspended and Tim Belcher, the starter for the next game, resting in a hotel room, Hershiser was the only pitcher left in the bullpen for Los Angeles. On his 3rd pitch, he got McReynolds to fly out to shallow center, Shelby racing in for the game-ending catch. LA won Game 5 to take a 3-2 series lead, and then the Mets would force a Game 7. LA shut out New York in Game 7 to go to the World Series, but there shouldn't have been a Game 7 or even a Game 6 if Gooden didn't crap the bed at the worst time possible for the Mets in Game 4. I guess not much has changed for the Mets in the last 37 years. To tell you the truth, I wanted to put Game 5 of this year's World Series on here just to piss off Yankee fans, but let's not kid ourselves. Nothing's going to top the 04 ALCS. At 101-61, they had their 3rd straight season of winning 100 or more games, locked up the AL East again, and virtually the whole core of the evil empire returned. In the playoffs, the Yankees vanquished the Twins in the ALDS and set up a rematch of the 2003 ALCS between the Yankees and hated arch rival Boston Red Sox. 2003 was a close, hard-fought, gritty series that saw Aaron Boone walk off the Sox in Game 7 off an iconic homer, and this series was heavily anticipated again. Well, you know the story by now. It looked to be a no contest through 3 games as the Yankees won the first 3 games. After New York obliterated Boston 19-8 in Boston in Game 3, the hope for the Red Sox looked dead. Then in Game 4, Boston rallied from 2-0 down and eventually won an extra 6-4 via a Big Papi walk-off 2-run homer after Mariano Rivera had a rare blown save. However, Game 5 is where I truly felt that the Yankees blew the series. The Yankees had a 4-2 lead after 6 innings, and then the Red Sox tied it again in the bottom of the 8th and wasted another save opportunity for Rivera. This time, the game went to the 14th inning, and David Ortiz was the hero again on a walk-off single to score Johnny Damon. In Game 6, the Red Sox had a 4-0 lead after the 4th inning and never looked back, and then that forced a Game 7 in the Bronx. 5 previous teams had managed to win 1 game after going down 3-0 in a postseason series. Of these 5, 2 made it to a Game 6. But now the Red Sox, the 26th team in Major League Baseball history to face a 3-0 series deficit, became the first to force a Game 7. After the game, Curt Schilling proudly wore his shirt with the Red Sox motto, "Why not us?" in the locker room and during the press conferences. In Game 7, it was a no contest. Boston got 2 in the first and 4 in the second, and it was game over, series over, choke complete. The Red Sox blew out the Yankees 10-3 and went on to win their first World Series since 1918, and while Fenway was in a frenzy in a good way, so was New York City, just not in the way you'd expect. Aside from 2001 and 2009, this was the best chance for the Yankees to get ring number 28, and they promptly choked. The only other series in sports I can think of where a team was down 3-0 and won in 7 was the Kings and Sharks in the first round of the 2014 NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. But in terms of sports chokes and collapses, this is absolutely on the same level as Super Bowl 51, the 2016 NBA Finals, and 35-3. Out of all those, I think this beats them all though. The worst choke in sports history is the 04 ALCS. I could end the video right here, but let the negativity continue. This has to be one of the most overlooked chokes in MLB history, and for good reason. The Phillies went 92-70 in 1964 and had a team full of young talent from the 1950s. Chris Short was a rookie on the 1959 team, and by the end of 1963 was the ace of the staff. He was joined by Art Mahaffey in 1960, Dennis Bennett in 1962, and Ray Kolb in 1963 as starters. The bullpen had Ed Robeck, who was purchased from the Washington Senators in April of 1964 as the primary relief pitcher, along with John Boozer and Dallas Green. Rookie Rick Wise, primarily a reliever but also a spot starter, joined the club in June. Jack Baldskin was the closer. The infield had 2 fine shortstops in Bobby Wine and Ruben Amaro. The outfield with Johnny Calazinian in right field, Tony Gonzalez in center, and Wes Covington was in left field. But Philly's most important acquisition was Jim Bunning from Detroit, and it proved to be the case as he pitched a perfect game on June 21st. I have zero doubt in my mind that the 1964 Phillies would have beaten the Yankees in the World Series that season. So why does 92-70 fall as a choke? Well, the Phillies were 90-60 after September 21st and had a firm grip on the NL pennant and lost 10 straight from September 21st to the 30th. This included getting swept in a 3-game series to, guess who? The Cardinals in St. Louis from September 28th through the 30th, and allowed the Cardinals to clinch the NL at that point. Yeah, the Cardinals faced a dominant Phillies team during their absolute worst stretch of the season that knocked them out of World Series contention. Still think the Cardinals aren't lucky. Anyway, Philly did win 2 games over the Reds in Cincinnati in October, but that'd be the only October baseball Philadelphia would play that season, as this unprecedented choke became known as the Phold, went down as possibly the biggest regular season collapse in MLB history. Oh, the 92 Bucks. 96-66, third straight NL East crown. Barry Bonds won his second MVP and their third straight appearance in the NLCS, and for the second season in a row, they faced the Atlanta Braves in the NLCS. I don't even need to research this one to tell you what happened, and if you're a Pirates fan, you should know what happened too. After dropping the 1990 and 91 NLCSs to the Reds and Braves respectively, 1992 was seen as the last chance for the Bucks, as Doug Drabek and Bonds were opted to be free agents in the offseason. In the playoffs, it looked to be more of the same, as the Bucks fell behind 3-1 to the Braves through 4 games. The Bucks' offense was quiet, the pitching and defense were subpar, and it looked like Atlanta would finish them off in Pittsburgh. However, the Pirates' offense finally woke up and won back-to-back blowouts 7-1 and 13-4 respectively to force a Game 7 in Atlanta. In that Game 7, it seemed like the Pirates were on their way to facing the Blue Jays in the World Series, despite them blowing several chances to add more runs. But as they had a 2-0 lead in the bottom of the 9th with Doug Drabek blanking the Braves through 8 innings, They were just 2 outs away from completing the comeback. That's when disaster struck. Jose Lynn's error at second allowed former MVP Terry Pendleton to move to third, and then Drabek got the bases loaded on a 4-pitch walk to ex-Pirate Sid Bream. Remember that name. Jim Leyland then yanked Drabek and put in closer Stan Belinda. After giving up a sac fly to make it 2-1, Belinda then reloaded the bases on a 5-pitch walk but got a pop-out next. With Francisco Cabrera at the plate and ahead 2-1 in the count, Andy Van Slyke called for Bonds to move in a little for a potential play at the plate and prevent a walk-off winner. Bonds responded to him by giving him the middle finger, and then immediate karma came. Cabrera lined the ball into left that scored David Justice and Bream, whose base running was heavily affected with several knee surgeries. Mike Lavaire's tag to the plate was just a little bit off as the throw from Bonds went to the right, and the Braves went on to the World Series. Van Slyke sat motionless for several moments in center, reflecting on Pirates fans at that moment. To this day, the Pirates still have not won a division title nor made it back to the NLCS, and after Bonds and Drabek were lost in free agency, the Pirates went from 1993 to 2012 without even having a winning season. Thanks a lot, Bonds, asshole. The Padres are one of the least successful franchises in MLB history, and almost every time they've made the playoffs and lost, it was mostly expected. But I think the 96 team is an exception. They went 91-71, won the NL West, and a team of Steve Finley, Wally Joyner, Tony Gwynn, season MVP Ken Committee, and Bruce Bochy winning Manager of the Year. The Padres had some expectations going in their playoff matchup against the Cardinals in the NLDS. A 3-run homer by Gary Getty off Joey Hamilton in Game 1 put the Cardinals up for good. A masterful pitching performance by Todd Stottlemyre, allowing only 1 earned run on a solo homer by Ricky Henderson. Rick Honeycutt and Dennis Eckersley shut the Padres down for the win. A well-fought Game 2 saw the Cardinals squander 2 leads in this game. Scott Sanders faced Andy Beans. Willie McGee put the Cardinals on top of the third with an RBI single. Then Committee tied the game with a leadoff homer in the 5th. Ron Gant cleared the bases with a double in the Cardinals' 5th to make it 4-1. A 2-run single, though, by Tony Gwynn made it a 1-run game in the Padres' 6th, and then an RBI groundout by Finley tied the game in the Padres' 8th. But St. Louis would score a run in the 8th inning on an RBI groundout that scored Brian Jordan. Eckersley got his 2nd save of the postseason to end the game. Man, only the Cardinals could blow 2 leads and their opponents still outchoke them. But Game 3 stings the most for San Diego. In Game 3, the Cardinals looked to Donovan Osborne to put the Padres away. Brian Jordan put the Cardinals ahead when he singled to center to score Royce Clayton. A would-be double play ball in the bottom of the 2nd helped the Padres take a 2-1 lead. Then Committee homered to make it 3-1 in the 3rd. An RBI single in the bottom of the 4th made it 4-1, and Osborne was done at that point. But since it's the Cardinals they're playing, it's never over until there's 27 outs. A leadoff homer by Ron Gant made it 4-2 in the 6th, but then a 1-out triple by John Mayberry scored Jordan, and a single would bring him home to tie the game at 4. The Cardinals then took the lead in the 7th when Ray Lankford scored on a double play, of course. The Padres were now 6 outs away from being eliminated. But when Committee hit his 2nd homer of the game to tie it at 5, the Padres were still alive. However, St. Louis put the game away in the top of the 9th when Jordan hit a 2-run homer that proved to be the series winner. Seriously, allowing them to score on a double play? But not lucky, guys. The Cardinals are not lucky. If Barry Bonds was to ever win a World Series, 2002 was the season. Full disclosure, this was the first World Series I remember watching. Despite the Giants and this World Series in general featuring 2 wildcard teams, both the Giants and Anaheim Angels belong there. San Francisco went 95-66 and had a stingy offense and stout rotation. The Giants erased a 2-1 deficit in the NLDS against the Braves to win in 5 games, and then stomped the Cardinals in the NLCS in 5 games, yes, to go to their first World Series since 1989. The Angels went 99-63 and finished 2nd in the AL West, but they were resilient all season, and that earned them the nickname the Never Say Die Angels. After shocking the Yankees in the ALDS and handled the Twins in the ALCS, it set the stage for 2 lengthy championship droughts. Anaheim took 2 of the first 3, but then the Giants came back to win the next 2, including a 16-4 shellacking of the Angels in Game 5 to set up a Game 6 in Anaheim. They had it. The Giants were 8 outs away from their first championship since moving to San Francisco and had a seemingly insurmountable 5-run lead. Then, disaster struck. Dusty Baker pulled Russ Ortiz after giving up consecutive singles to Tim Salmon and Garrett Anderson, and in came Felix Rodriguez. After fouling off pitches, Scott Spiezio belted a 3-run homer to make it 5-3. Scott Iyer and Tim Worrell kept the Angels off the board the rest of the inning, and Worrell came back in the bottom of the 8th. He immediately gave up a solo homer to Darren Erstad to make it 5-4, and Baker yanked him for Rob Nen to face Troy Gloss. Gloss doubled to score Sean Figan, who pinch ran for Salmon, and Anderson gave the Halos the lead 6-5. San Francisco was completely deflated as the Angels won Game 7 4-1 for their first and only championship in franchise history. At least the Giants would win 3 titles in a 5-year span from 2010 to 14, but I think I can speak for all Giants fans when I say 2002 was their most devastating loss in franchise history and a gigantic collapse. I mean, was there really any other choice for this one right here? The 2001 Mariners are undoubtedly the most missed opportunity in MLB history, as they went 116-46, tying the record for the most wins in the modern era in MLB history. After having prime Ken Griffey Jr., prime Edgar Martinez, prime Randy Johnson, and Alex Rodriguez starting his peak, Seattle came up short in the playoffs throughout the mid to late 90s. Then, after progressively losing Griffey Jr., the big unit, and Aroyd, the Mariners still had a stacked team in Brent Boone, Martinez pounding the ball, the bullpen and rotation rising up to the ranks, and called up basically the Japanese Ty Cobb in Ichiro. However, when they were in the playoffs, there were red flags in their ALDS against Cleveland, as while the Indians were certainly not dominant, they were a good team, but Seattle struggled against them. Seattle took the series in 5 games and then met the Yankees in the ALCS. Those red flags were realized as the Yankees won the first 2 in Seattle and the tone of the series was set. The Mariners did blow out the Yankees in Game 3, but a blown lead in Game 4 with the pitching falling apart, walking 8 Yankees and a walk-off 2-run homer by Alfonso Soriano in the bottom of the 9th to win it 3-1, and that was when Seattle lost the series. The Yankees destroyed the Mariners 12-3 in Game 5, and the Yankees were on their way to their 4th straight World Series and 5th since 1996. This egregious choke set the Mariners franchise back 20 years, as they didn't even make the playoffs again until 2022, and still are the only franchise to never make a World Series. I was so close to putting the 1985 World Series on here and pull the biggest troll job on my channel, because many people forget St. Louis did have a 3-1 lead in that series. But for as much as I hate the Cardinals, I will admit they were hosed in that Game 6. That's where my sympathies end with them. Next in line would most likely be the 2012 NLCS against the Giants, where the Cardinals also blew a 3-1 series lead and got outscored by the Giants 20-1 in Games 4 through 7. But the Cardinals shouldn't even have been in that series, seeing that the Nationals choked in that series before, and the Cardinals got a gift of their own against Atlanta in the wild card. Man, the luck just never ends with these bastards. And then finally, I'd say the 1987 World Series, but as hilarious of a choke that was, at least that series went to 7 games with the home team winning all the games, and also the Cardinals suffered several key injuries in that year's playoffs. So Cardinals fans can use that as a fresh, ripe excuse for losing to an 85-win team. However, their luck ran out big time in the 2004 World Series. The Cardinals pulled a 105-57 season in 04 out of their ass, surprise, surprise, as the Cubs and Astros regressed in strong seasons from Jim Edmonds, Scott Rowland, off-season acquisition Larry Walker, and of course Albert Pujols guided a Moneyball type of offense. Edmonds, Rowan, and Pujols in particular each hit 30 or more homers and each drove in 100 or more RBIs, as the Cardinals were the #1 scoring team in the league. Their rotation and bullpen were dominant as well, led by Chris Carpenter, Jason Marquis, Matt Morris, and Jeff Suppan, who all had 15 or more wins and ERAs better than .430. Jason Isringhausen also led the league in saves with 47. So the Cardinals dominated the Dodgers in the NLDS and squeaked by against the aforementioned Astros in the NLCS to face the Red Sox in the World Series. The arrogance and cockiness from Cardinal fans and the franchise proved to be their downfall, as they saw Boston's miraculous comeback against the Yankees as an emotional comeback and were in for a letdown. The only letdown here were the Cardinals. Simply put, Boston completely ripped the Cardinals a new one in a 4-game sweep for their first title since 1918. How bad was this choke? Well, I'll break it down. Edmonds, Rowan, and Pujols went a combined 6 for 45 with 1 RBI in this series. Larry Walker was the only offense they had, as he hit .357 and 2 homers and was responsible for 21% of St. Louis's runs in the playoffs. And at no point did the Cardinals even have a lead in this series. That's right, the closest the Cardinals ever came to having a lead in a single game in this series was when it was scoreless in the top of the first of Game 1. Spare me the, well, Carpenter missed the whole playoffs with a tweaked shoulder excuses, Cardinal fans. He's not the reason you were taken out to the woodshed in this series. All your fearsome 3-4-5 hitters had to do was play up to their abilities as they had all season, and they completely shit their pants in the biggest stage in front of the whole country. Sure, you BS'd your way to 2 chips after this meltdown, but aside from the 2019 meltdown against the Nationals in the NLCS, another series you were cocky and arrogant and claimed, just give us our 12th ring now, before the series even began. This is my favorite meltdown I've seen you have, and I'll personally never let you forget about it. Okay, so like the Diamondbacks, a franchise who's only been around since 1998 won't have a ton of playoff chokes. However, the Rays have been one of the better ran small market franchises over the last 15 years, and they actually have been a favorite to go far in some instances. Some would point to 2010, 2011, or 2019 as bigger chokes, but knowing what we know now about the Rangers in 2010 and 2011, it's difficult to blame the Rays. Similar to the 2019 Astros, Tampa just ran into better teams and lost. It is what it is. However, the 2021 ALDS, after the team won 100 games and were the defending AL champs, is more unacceptable. With a fundamental offense with the likes of Wander Franco, Mike Zunino, Austin Meadows, and Rookie of the Year Randy Arozarena, and a pitching by committee type of staff, Tampa was the #1 seed in the AL and was favored to make a deep playoff push that season. Their first opponent was a very good but not great Boston Red Sox team who went 92-70 and were the top wildcard that season. Tampa shut out Boston 5-0 in Game 1 and all appeared to be well. Until Game 2, when the Sox evened the series at a game apiece in a 14-6 blowout. The series shifted to Boston, and this was the game that stung the most for Tampa. The Rays fell behind early 4-2, but eventually tied the game in the top of the 8th after a Franco homer and a Arozarena RBI. The game went to extras, and the 13th inning proved to be a wild one. Pivetta pitched a 4th scoreless inning, which included a ground rule double by Kevin Kiermaier as the batted ball bounced off the right field wall, the ground, and then off of Hunter Renfroe's hip into the bullpen, which otherwise would have resulted in a Rays run, as Yandy Diaz was running from first base when the ball was hit. Christian Vazquez ended the game with a 2-run walk-off home run off of Pinedo in the bottom of the 13th. Boston then manhandled Tampa 6-5 in Game 4 behind a 5-run bottom of the 3rd, and Tampa never recovered. I'm sure all 7 Rays fans were devastated in that ALDS. What's worse than losing back-to-back World Series? Well, how about blowing 2 insurmountable leads in an elimination game? And even worse, it was against the Cardinals, which means we have to listen nonstop about how they shit golden bricks just because you doofuses couldn't get one more out up to twice. Anyway, the 2011 Rangers were really good. In 2010, they won their first ever playoff series in franchise history and went on to the World Series where they were clobbered by the Giants. That team was more of a surprise team though, but in 2011, Texas had expectations. And they lived up to them as they went 96-66, captured their second straight ALS title, and with a loaded offense and adding Cy Young winner Cliff Lee to that cheat code rotation they had, the Rangers breezed through Tampa and Detroit in the ALDS and ALCS respectively to make it back to the World Series. They faced a Cardinal team who was good but not dominant and once again benefited from dumb luck in the NL playoffs. Nevertheless, the Rangers were heavy favorites in this series to bring home the franchise's first championship. The two split the first two games in St. Louis, and then the Rangers took two of the next three as the series shifted to Dallas. But of course, you know the story by now. Going back to St. Louis with a 3-2 series lead, the Rangers were poised to finish the series off. Texas scored 3 runs in the 7th inning to take a 7-4 lead, but the Cardinals got a run back to cut it to 7-5 in the 8th. Then came the bottom of the 9th. The Rangers are still ahead 7-5 and needed just one more out and strike to win it all. Career journeyman David Freese hit a fly ball to the wall and right, and all Nelson Cruz had to do was just play a little deeper and he would have made the catch, and it would have ended the series and the game and the championship drought. But of course, teams forget how to play baseball when playing the Cardinals in pivotal matchups, so it ended up being a game-tying RBI triple. However, Texas appeared to have made that a moot point, as in the top of the 10th, Elvis Andrus singled and Josh Hamilton crushed a 2-run homer to center to put Texas back up 9-7. Once again, bottom of the 10th, the Rangers still have a 9-8 lead, and the Cardinals are again down to their final out and strike. Lance Berkman drilled a Scott Feldman pitch right down the middle of the plate to score John Jay and tie the game up. Then David Freese hit one to the grass in center to force a Game 7. Texas never stood a chance in Game 7, and the Cardinals once again got bailed out by their opponents, all of a sudden acting like they've never seen a baseball in their lives. Are you surprised that this is the first and only time in World Series history that a team came back from 2 different 2-run deficits in the 9th inning or later in the same game? I'm not. With the Cardinals, literally anything is possible. The Blue Jays won back-to-back World Series in 1992 and 93, but their best overall team came in 1985 when they went 99-62 and won the AL East. With an offense led by Desmano Garcia, Tony Fernandez, George Bell, and Jesse Barfield, Toronto flew to new heights with the core they had built up since 1983. Although pitching was shaky at times, people thought it wouldn't matter all that much as the offense was just too overwhelming. In the ALCS, they faced a Royals team who went 91-71 and won the AL West. The Royals had been very competitive in the AL for years up to this point, but were victims of bad luck whenever they made the playoffs. 4 games into the series, everything seemed to be falling into place as they had Kansas City on the ropes up 3-1 in the series. The Royals shut out the Blue Jays 2-0 in Game 5 to shift the series back to Canada. As pointed out several times in this video, this Game 6 is when Toronto blew the series. Down only 3-2 off a George Brett homer going into the 6th, a walk, sac bunt, and RBI double by Buddy Bacania made it 4-2. Biancala advanced to third on a terrible throwing error and scored Lonnie Smith's double. The Blue Jays scored 1 run when Mosby singled, advanced to second base with a base on balls to Upshaw, and then Mosby scored on Cliff Johnson's single to make the score 5-3, but Kansas City held on and tied the series at 3 wins apiece. Game 7 saw Kansas City dominate from the get-go in a 6-2 win, and the Royals took home their first World Series in franchise history as they erased another 3-1 deficit against the Cardinals to win the series in 7 games. But whether or not you want to throw Don Denkinger under the bus for that series, the fact remains 1985 was a huge missed opportunity for the Blue Jays. They made the playoffs in 1989 and 1991 before their back-to-back titles, but were handled by the A's and Twins respectively in both series. Sure, their 8-1 disaster against Seattle in 2022 was horrible, but Toronto didn't have nearly the same expectations in that wildcard series compared to that loaded team of '85. What happens when the unluckiest team in baseball faces off against the luckiest team in baseball? You get the 2012 NLDS between the Nationals and the Cardinals. Before this choke job against them, the biggest robbery in Nats history came in 1994 when they were the best team in baseball, and then the strike happened, canceling the World Series. Man, St. Louis sure does appear in a lot of these. That's no mistake. Anyway, while most people assume the Expos would have won the World Series in '94, you should never assume things. From 1995 to 2011, the franchise was largely irrelevant until they had their first breakthrough since moving to DC in 2005. Their rebuild began to grow with their offense being led by Bryce Harper becoming a superstar and Ryan Zimmerman crushing the ball. Despite shutting down Steven Strasburg for future runs, the Nats still had dominated the NL, going 98-64 and the #1 seed. In the NLDS, they faced St. Louis, who were fresh off getting bailed out by one of the most angering calls in MLB history against the Braves. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. It's Game 5 and the series is tied 2-2. The Nationals had a 6-0 lead after 3 innings and were all but ready to go to their first NLCS in 31 years and DC's first playoff series win since the 1924 World Series. This moment proved to be how dumb of a move it was to shut down Strasburg, as the Cardinals took advantage of a team being brain dead for about the 1,000th time in their franchise's history and made it a 7-5 game in the top of the 9th. Then, thinking the Cardinals couldn't possibly get any luckier, Drew Storen worked the 9th and got the Cardinals down to their final out and strike. Sound familiar? Back-to-back walks loaded up the bases for Daniel Descalso, and he hit a hard but playable grounder to short, which deflected off the glove of Ian Desmond that scored 2 runs to tie the game. Then, little-known player Pete Kozma lined one to right to score 2 more, and gave the Cardinals the lead that ended up being the game winner. This shit absolutely does not happen if the Nats faced literally any other team in the MLB. Let's put it that way on the Cardinals' devil luck, because every other team just doesn't want to win badly enough. Anyway, the Nationals proved to be incredible playoff chokers throughout the 2010s until they finally avenged the Cardinals years later in my favorite Cardinals meltdown since the '04 World Series in the NLCS. But while the world didn't end in 2012, DC felt like their world collapsed after this devastating choke. Well, I hope you're all mad, I hope you're all angry, and I hope you're all crying in the comments. Did I leave out any chokes? What do you think your biggest team choke job is? Let me know down below.